The scent of cinnamon and expensive Belgian chocolate hit Nia first, a cruel sweet contrast to the biting December wind that had been stinging her cheeks for the last 6 blocks. She hesitated for a fraction of a second on the welcome mat, her worn sneakers leaving a small damp imprint on the pristine marble floor of Sterling's patisserie. Inside, the world was golden and glowing, insulated from the gray slush of New York City streets by heavy glass and wealth. "Mama, look." Leo's voice was a bright chirp in the hushed atmosphere. His small hand, encased in a mitten that had been darned twice at the thumb, tugged urgently at hers. "They have it. The big one." Nia tightened her grip on him, guiding him away from the entrance as the door hissed shut behind them, cutting off the howl of the wind. She felt the eyes land on her immediately. They were heavy, silent weights, the glances of women in cashmere coats and men in tailored suits. A woman at the nearest table pulled her designer handbag off the floor and set it on her lap, her eyes flicking over Nia's threadbare coat before turning back to her coffee with deliberate disinterest. Nia kept her chin high, ignoring the familiar burn of humiliation that prickled at the back of her neck. She wasn't here for them. She was here for Leo. "Gentle baby," she whispered, bending down to unzip Leo's jacket. He was practically vibrating with excitement, his dark curls dusted with melting snowflakes. "Remember what we said? Just looking until we pay." But Leo was 5, and the display case was a wonderland of sugar and light. He pressed closer to the glass, his breath fogging up a small patch right in front of a green frosted dinosaur cookie the size of a dinner plate. "It's a T-Rex, Mama. He has teeth and everything." "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, cutting through Leo's delight like a knife. Nia straightened up to find the manager standing behind the counter. Mrs. Gable, as her name tag read, was a woman whose smile didn't reach her eyes. She leaned over the counter, glaring not at Nia, but at the small smudge of condensation Leo's breath had left on the glass. "Please keep your child from touching the display," Mrs. Gable said, her tone dripping with polite venom. "We have paying customers who expect a certain standard of hygiene." "He didn't touch it," Nia said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against the thin roll of dollar bills she had saved from 3 weeks of double shifts. "And we are paying customers. We'd like the dinosaur cookie, please." The manager raised an eyebrow, looking pointedly at Nia's frayed cuffs and then at the price tag displayed next to the cookie, $8. An obscene amount for flour and sugar, but a promise was a promise. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Gable asked, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the couple at the window. "The day-old bin in the back corner has some lovely oatmeal raisin cookies for $1. Might be more sensible." The suggestion hung in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice. It wasn't just about money. It was about belonging. Mrs. Gable was telling her, without using a single slur, that she and her son belonged in the back, with the stale leftovers. Nia felt a flash of heat in her chest, but she forced a smile that felt tight on her face. "The dinosaur cookie," she repeated clearly. "Fresh. Please." She pulled the crumpled bills and a handful of quarters from her pocket, placing them on the polished counter. One by one, she smoothed out the bills, counting them out. 1, 2, 3. The silence in the shop seemed to stretch, amplifying the small, metallic clink of the coins. Leo went quiet, sensing the tension, his small hand creeping back into hers. Mrs. Gable sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of impatience, as she finally reached into the case with a pair of tongs. She dropped the cookie into a white paper bag with little care and slid it across the counter. Nia pushed the money forward, her pride the only thing keeping her spine straight. "Thank you," Nia murmured, though the words tasted like ash. She handed the bag to Leo, whose smile returned instantly, bright enough to light up the room. "Thank you, Mama," he beamed, hugging the bag to his chest. Nia turned to leave, desperate to get back to the cold anonymity of the street. But as she took a step, a strange sensation washed over her. The hairs on her arms stood up beneath her sweater. It wasn't the judgment of the manager or the patrons this time. It was something else. Heavier. Darker. She felt a gaze burning into her back, intense and unyielding. It came from the far corner of the room, a booth shrouded in shadow where the golden lights didn't quite reach. The little bell above the door didn't ring, but the silence that suddenly fell over the back corner booth was loud enough to stop her heart. It wasn't the smell of roasted coffee that froze Nia in place. It was the sudden, absolute stillness from the shadowed booth that made her instincts scream run. Every muscle in her body locked tight, a primal warning system that hadn't been triggered since the night she fled Chicago with nothing but a backpack and a prayer. "Come on, Leo," she whispered urgently, tugging on her son's hand. "We have to go." But Leo, oblivious to the terror radiating from his mother, planted his small feet firmly on the tiled floor. "Wait, Mama." My mitten fell. He bent down, fumbling with the red wool glove, his back turning toward the entrance and his face turning directly toward the back of the shop. A chair scraped against the floor. The sound was deliberate, heavy. From the shadows, a figure emerged. He was a towering presence in the quaint bakery, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than the building they were standing in. His skin was pale, his jawline sharp as cut glass, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, cold, gray, and terrifyingly familiar. Mrs. Gable, the manager, let out a small, satisfied huff. She smoothed her apron and stepped forward, misreading the situation entirely. She saw a wealthy white patron standing up to deal with a nuisance. "I apologize, sir," she said, her voice dripping with sycophancy. "I was just asking them to leave. We don't want them disturbing your—" Dominic didn't even look at her. He walked past the manager as if she were a piece of furniture, his gaze fixed solely on Nia. The air in the shop seemed to be sucked out of the room. The patrons fell silent, forks hovering halfway to their mouths. He stopped 2 feet away from Nia. The scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco that clung to him brought tears of panic to her eyes. He was older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but the raw, leashed power he radiated was exactly the same. Then Leo stood up. "Got it," he chirped, turning around to face the strange man looming over his mother. Dominic's eyes dropped to the boy. He took in the worn jacket, the dark curls, the skin the color of warm mahogany that matched Nia's. And then Leo blinked. The breath hissed out of Dominic's lungs. There, set in the innocent face of this little boy, were his own eyes. Storm gray. Unmistakable. A genetic signature that no amount of hiding could erase. 6 years, Dominic whispered, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. The sound of it made Nia flinch. Mrs. Gable, sensing the tension but still oblivious to the danger, took a step closer. "Sir, really, I can call the police if this woman is bothering you." "We don't allow." Dominic's head snapped toward her. The look on his face was so lethal that the manager actually took a step back, her mouth clicking shut. "Silence," he commanded, the volume low but the authority absolute. "You are speaking to my family." The word family rang through the silent bakery like a gunshot. The manager's face went slack with shock. Nia felt the blood drain from her own face. She tried to step back, to pull Leo behind her, but there was nowhere to go. Dominic reached out, his large hand trembling slightly as he brushed a thumb over Leo's cheek, tracing the line of a jaw that mirrored his own. "You told me you lost him," Dominic said to Nia, his eyes returning to hers, burning with a mixture of betrayal and overwhelming possession. "You sent me the papers." "I did what I had to do," Nia managed to choke out, her defiance weak against the tidal wave of his presence. Dominic's hand closes around Nia's wrist, a shackle and a caress all at once. "We are leaving. Now." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Nia hissed, pulling against his grip, though she knew resistance was as futile as trying to hold back a winter storm. Dominic didn't even blink. He didn't tighten his hold, but he didn't let go either. Instead, he raised his free hand in a sharp, subtle gesture. Instantly, 2 large men who had been sitting at a nearby table stood up. They weren't eating pastries. They were scanning the street outside, their hands hovering near their jackets. One of them, a man with a thick neck named Marco, whom Nia remembered with a shiver from 6 years ago, moved to block the front door. "You are not safe here, Nia," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "They know." "Who knows?" Nia demanded, panic rising in her throat. "I've been invisible." "Nobody knows." Crack. The sound wasn't like a gunshot in the movies. It was sharper, louder, a violent snap that shattered the world. The massive plate glass window of the bakery exploded inward, showering the expensive displays and screaming patrons with shards of razor-sharp confetti. "Down!" Dominic roared. Before Nia could process the noise, she felt a heavy weight slam into her. Dominic tackled her and Leo to the marble floor, his large frame covering them completely. He curled around them like a shield, burying Nia's face into the wool of his coat and tucking Leo beneath his chest. Glass rained down on his back, pinging off his shoulders, but not a single splinter touched them. "Mama," Leo shrieked, his voice muffled against Dominic's shirt. "I've got you. I've got you both," Dominic growled against Nia's ear. He wasn't shaking. Amidst the chaos of screaming customers and the wail of distant sirens, he was terrifyingly calm. He shifted, rising to a crouch while keeping them pinned beneath him. "Marco, back exit. Now." He hauled Nia to her feet with one arm and scooped Leo up with the other as if the boy weighed nothing. "Run," he commanded. They scrambled through the kitchen, past terrified bakers dropping trays of dough, and burst out into the freezing alleyway behind the shop. The cold air hit Nia's face, stinging her eyes, but Dominic didn't stop. A massive black SUV was idling there, its exhaust pumping white clouds into the gray afternoon. The back door was already open. "Get in," Dominic shouted, practically throwing Nia onto the leather seat. He shoved Leo into her arms and dove in after them just as another pop-pop-pop echoed from the street corner, chipping the brick wall inches from where his head had been a second ago. The heavy door slams shut, sealing out the noise. In the sudden quiet of the leather interior, Dominic looks at Nia, a smear of blood on his cheek. "Drive," he commands. The silence inside the armored SUV was absolute, broken only by Leo's soft, hitching breaths as he slept against Nia's chest, oblivious to the fact that his life had just shifted from survival mode to unimaginable wealth. Outside the tinted windows, the city had long since faded, replaced by the dark, looming shapes of snow-covered pines as they wound their way up a private drive. Nia sat rigid, her body pressed as far against the door as possible, trying to put even an inch of distance between herself and the man who took up all the oxygen in the car. Dominic hadn't spoken since they left the alley. He sat watching her, his gaze heavy and unreadable in the dim light of the dashboard. Nia shivered, but it wasn't from the air conditioning. She was remembering the broken radiator in her apartment, the one that hissed and rattled but never truly warmed the room, forcing her and Leo to sleep in layers of sweaters. She thought of the drafty window she stuffed with old towels. That cold was familiar. It was a cold she knew how to fight. The cold coming off Dominic, the cold of absolute control, was something she didn't know if she could survive again. The car slowed, passing through massive iron gates that swung open silently, revealing a sprawling estate that looked less like a home and more like a fortress of stone and glass. Lights blazed from every window, casting long golden shadows across the pristine snow. To a stranger, it might have looked magical, like a Christmas card. To Nia, it looked like a prison built of money. As the car stopped, Dominic was moving before the engine died. He walked around to her side and opened the door. Nia moved to unbuckle Leo, but Dominic was faster. He reached in, sliding his arms under the sleeping boy with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man who had just stared down gunmen. Leo stirred, murmuring something about cookies, and settled his head against Dominic's silk tie. "I can carry him," Nia protested, her voice sounding thin in the crisp night air. "He is heavy, and you are exhausted," Dominic said simply, turning toward the massive oak front doors. "Come inside, Nia." She followed because she had no choice, her worn sneakers leaving wet, cheap footprints on the expansive marble foyer. The heat inside was instant and enveloping. A chandelier the size of her entire living room hung overhead, scattering crystals of light everywhere. "Mr. Sterling." An elderly woman with a kind face and a starched apron hurried forward. "Oh, thank God." Marco called ahead. "Maria." Dominic nodded, his voice softening. "Take Leo to the East Wing room. Don't wake him if you can help it. Stay with him." Nia stepped forward instinctively. "No. He stays with me. He needs a bed, Nia. Not a couch, not a floor." "A bed," Dominic said, handing his son over to the housekeeper. Maria gave Nia a reassuring, grandmotherly smile. I promise, ma'am. I have grandkids of my own. He'll be safe as a lamb. Nia watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the sound of Maria's footsteps faded, she spun around to face Dominic. We are not staying, Dominic. I appreciate you saving us, really I do. But this isn't us. My apartment is home. My job is there. Dominic began to unbutton his blood-flecked jacket, tossing it carelessly onto a velvet bench. Home, he repeated, the word dripping with dark amusement. He took a step toward her, forcing her to back up until her shoulders hit the cold plaster of the wall. That apartment where the radiator screams all night? Where the water runs brown if it rains too hard? Where your landlord looks at you with disgust every time you ask him to fix the lock? Nia froze. How do you know about the radiator? I know everything, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low timbre. He braced his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. I know you work double shifts at the diner and still count pennies for bread. I know you walk 3 extra blocks to avoid the corner boys. I bought your building 2 months ago, Nia. I fired the landlord who harassed you. I paid the heating bill you accidentally forgot. Nia stared at him, horror and confusion warring in her chest. You've been watching me? 4 months. I've been protecting you, he corrected, his gray eyes burning into hers. I waited 6 years. I let you run because I thought maybe you needed to be free. But that wasn't freedom, Nia. That was suffering. And I am done watching my wife and son suffer. I am not your wife anymore, she whispered, though the fight was draining out of her, replaced by the overwhelming seductive pull of his strength. A piece of paper doesn't change what you are to me, Dominic murmured. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell the gunpowder and the winter air on his skin. You are safe here. No one looks at you with anything but respect here. No one hurts you here. You are mine. Nia shivered, not from fear, but from the terrifying realization that part of her wants to surrender to the safety, to stop fighting the world alone. Your room is ready, he whispered, pushing off the wall and walking away without looking back, leaving her trembling in the gilded hallway. By the next evening, the smell of roasted garlic and fresh oregano filled the cavernous kitchen, a rich domestic scent that felt completely at odds with the silhouette of the armed guard pacing past the snowy window outside. The dining room was set for 3. Crystal goblets sparkled under the dim light of the chandelier, and heavy velvet drapes shut out the dark forest beyond. Nia sat across from Dominic, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had expected an interrogation. She had expected him to demand custody or force her to sign papers. She hadn't expected this. More ketchup, please, Leo announced, waving a fork triumphantly. Dominic, the man who made grown men tremble with a single look, reached for the silver sauce boat and poured a precise dollop of ketchup onto his son's plate. On the fine bone china sat not a filet mignon or a lobster tail, but 6 perfectly breaded chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. You like them? Dominic asked, his voice devoid of its usual hard edge. They are better than the store ones, Leo said around a mouthful, swinging his legs happily. Mama usually buys the round ones because they are on sale. But these have spikes. Nia felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at Dominic. You heard him, she said softly. In the bakery. You heard him ask for the dinosaur cookie. I hear everything he says, Dominic replied, his eyes briefly meeting hers before returning to Leo. And I remember everything. For the next 20 minutes, Nia watched a surreal scene unfold. The ruthless crime lord listened with absolute seriousness as Leo explained the complex defensive capabilities of a stegosaurus versus a T-Rex. Dominic didn't check his watch. He didn't look at his phone. He looked at Leo as if the boy were the only important thing in the universe. And Leo was glowing. He wasn't the quiet, watchful child he had to be in their cramped apartment. He was loud, happy, and safe. When Maria came to take Leo for his bath, he went without a fuss, clutching a new toy car Dominic had produced from his pocket. The silence that followed their departure was heavy, but it wasn't empty. He's happy here, Dominic said quietly, taking a sip of his wine. He's a child. He's happy where there are toys and food, Nia deflected, though her defense was weakening. She took a breath, needing to address the shadow that had been hanging over them since the bakery. Dominic, yesterday. The men with guns. How did they find us? I was careful. I changed my name. I never used credit cards. Dominic set his glass down. The warmth evaporated from his face, replaced by the mask of the dawn. You were careful, Nia. You were brilliant. But you made one mistake. What? You trusted people, he said flatly. You trusted your friend, Sarah? Nia shook her head. No. Sarah is my best friend. She helped me find the apartment. She babysat Leo when I worked late. She would never. Sarah didn't know, Dominic interrupted. But her husband did. He's a gambler, Nia. He owes money to the wrong people, my enemies. When he overheard you telling Sarah about the bakery trip, about the specific time you'd be there, he made a call. He sold your location for $10,000 to clear his debt. The room spun. Nia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Sarah's husband. The man who had smiled at her, who had eaten at her table. He had sold her and Leo for cash. The freedom she had fought so hard to maintain suddenly felt like a lie. She had been surrounded by wolves in sheep's clothing, and she hadn't even known it. The world out there used you, Nia, Dominic said, reaching across the table to cover her trembling hand with his own. His palm was warm, rough, and solid. They saw a single mother with no protection, and they saw a target. They saw leverage. I don't see leverage. I see my life. Tears pricked her eyes, tears of anger, of betrayal, and of relief. I thought I was keeping him safe from you, she whispered. And instead, you almost walked him into a grave, Dominic said, brutal but honest. I am not a good man, Nia. I have never claimed to be. But I am the only man on this earth who will burn the world down to keep a scratch off that boy's knee. Before she could answer, a vibration buzzed against the mahogany table. Dominic glanced at his phone, and his expression shifted. The father vanished. The predator returned. It's time, he said, standing up abruptly. He buttoned his jacket, checking something at his waist, a holster. Time for what? Nia stood too, a fresh wave of panic rising. To end this, Dominic said. He looked at her, his gray eyes dark with promise. Sarah's husband. The men who bought the information. The men who shattered that glass. By tomorrow morning, they will no longer be a threat. Dominic, she breathed, realizing what he meant to do. Wait up for me, he commanded, not asking. Put Leo to sleep. Leave a light on. I will come back to you. He turned and walked out, leaving Nia alone in the grand dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a dinosaur dinner and the shattering truth that the only safe place left in the world might be right here, in the center of the monster's den. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking the seconds of a night that felt like it would never end. Each rhythmic tuck echoed against the marble walls of the silent library, sounding less like a mechanism and more like a heartbeat slowing down. Nia paced the length of the Persian rug, her arms wrapped tight around herself, wearing a silk robe that cost more than her car but feeling colder than she ever had in her drafty apartment. She stopped by the window, staring out into the black void of the forest. Somewhere out there, Dominic was keeping his promise. I will always protect you. The words, spoken in the chaos of the bakery attack, replayed in her mind. For 6 years, she had convinced herself that protecting Leo meant running away from this man. Now, shivering in the safety of his fortress, she realized with a jolt that she wasn't terrified he would come back. She was terrified he wouldn't. At 3 a.m., the heavy front door groaned open. Nia was in the foyer before the latch clicked shut. Dominic stood there, framed by the darkness of the driveway. He looked exhausted. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck, and there was a smear of dirt on his expensive coat. A small, angry cut marred his lower lip, and his knuckles were bruised, but he was standing. He was whole. He looked up and saw her. For a moment, his guard dropped, revealing a depth of relief that stole the breath from her lungs. Nia, he rasped, his voice rough with fatigue. Why are you awake? You came back, she breathed, crossing the distance between them but stopping just inches away. She searched his face, looking for the monster she had run from, but finding only the man who had shielded her son with his own body. I told you I would. He didn't reach for her, though his hands twitched at his sides. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. It is done, Nia. Sarah's husband, the others. They won't touch you again. The threat is gone. Gone, she repeated. Completely. He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and serious. Which means you don't have to stay anymore. The danger is over. If you want to leave, if you want to go back to your life, I will have Marco drive you in the morning. I'll set up a trust for Leo. You'll never have to worry about money, but you won't have to deal with me. The silence stretched between them, heavier than the ticking clock. He was giving her the one thing she had claimed she wanted for 6 years, her freedom. He was opening the cage door. Nia looked at the bruises on his hands that had broken violence for her, but had also poured ketchup for Leo with infinite patience. She thought of the cold apartment, the double shifts, the constant fear of the future. Then she thought of Leo's laugh at the dinner table tonight. She thought of the way Dominic looked at her, as if she were the only source of light in his dark world. Freedom without love was just loneliness. And she was done being lonely. Nia stepped forward, closing the final inch between them. She reached up, her fingers ghosting over the cut on his lip. Dominic flinched, then leaned into her touch, his eyes fluttering shut. Leo wakes up at 7, she whispered. He's going to ask for his father. Dominic's eyes snapped open, searching hers with desperate hope. And his mother? She's tired of running in the cold, Nia said, her voice trembling but sure. She wants to be home. Dominic let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then his arms were around her, crushing her to his chest. It wasn't the grip of a jailer. It was the embrace of a drowning man finding shore. He kissed her, tasting of winter air and iron, but mostly of promise. It was a seal on a new contract, not one of possession, but of partnership. As dawn breaks over the snow-covered garden, Nia watches the sunrise. She smiles. She isn't a prisoner. She is the queen of this castle. Sometimes, the harsh winters of our lives lead us to the warmest shelters, reminding us that true safety isn't just about strong walls, but about the people willing to stand between us and the storm. When we look past the surface, past the worn coats, or the frightening reputations, we often find that love doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks for the courage to stay. May you hold your loved ones a little closer tonight, and remember that it is never too late to find your way home.